The station was a forgotten dot at the edge of known space, a junk heap with a shield array older than most of its crew. I didn't care. I wasn't there to care. I was there to not be remembered. One of those quiet corners of the galaxy where the bureaucracy forgot to send more than one patrol a year and where you could eat a steak in peace, assuming the protein printer wasn't jammed or leaking again. I had just cut into mine, charred, perfectly undercooked and steaming, when I noticed the eyes. Not the usual stares from green cadets or nosy techs, but eyes. Silver and purple, wide and unblinking. Watching every move of my knife and fork like a predator observing a rival species. The kid had appeared out of nowhere. Pale blue skin, hair like the shadows of a dying star, and absolutely silent. He didn't say a word. Just stood there at the corner of my table, as if my steak was the first warm thing he'd seen in years. I looked around. No one else noticed. Or maybe they were pretending not to. He wasn't from the station, that much was obvious. No ID band. No standard uniform. And definitely not on any clearance list. That should have been a problem. Should have meant calling it in, alerting the commander, raising a quiet lockdown. Instead, I slid my spare fork across the table. He took it like it was a weapon. Saturday. Never blinked. I'd seen wild dogs with better manners, but I'd also seen battle-hardened men eat after 6 days in trench fog. This wasn't hunger. This was survival. The kind that lingers long after the body is fed. Then she arrived. You could feel her enter before you saw her. The pressure in the room shifted. Conversation died mid-word. Forks paused mid-air. She walked like a storm in humanoid form, graceful, lethal, and entirely too calm. Her armor looked ceremonial, but the kind that was still sharp at the edges. Her eyes scanned the room like it was a threat, until they landed on me. Or rather, on the child eating my steak. You gave him a fork, she said, voice smooth like mercury and twice as dangerous. I had to, I replied. She didn't laugh. She barely moved. Just studied me with an intensity that reminded me of old orbital snipers, calculating trajectory, impact, cost. He hasn't spoken since the day our world fell, she said. But when he saw you, he whispered something. I waited. He called you uncle. I chewed the words, let them settle. Most men would have taken it as poetic or creepy. I just nodded. Kid ate like family. That counted for something. I asked if she wanted a seat. She declined. Told me his name was Seer, which, in her tongue, meant something between silence and thunder. He didn't look up once during her explanation. Just kept eating. Chewing like the world might vanish if he didn't finish in time. She said they'd come from the ruins of Luraxis Prime. The vampire descendant world. Biosymbiotic evolution, immune to most standard weaponry, fast, ancient, proud. Too proud, maybe. When the Council pulled support during the Siege of Suns, their defenses crumbled. She had escaped with only one surviving child, Seer. His father had died at the perimeter breach. She never said his name. I asked what she wanted. She said she wanted nothing, just answers. Why a human fork and a half-cooked slab of meat had cracked through layers of trauma her species healers couldn't reach. I shrugged. Sometimes the smallest gestures break the strongest walls. She left without eating. Seer stayed. Followed me like a shadow after that. Slept in the mess bay vents, mimicked everything I did. Watched how I patched gear, cleaned my boots, folded my shirt. Never asked a thing. By the end of the week, I'd assigned him a cot. By the end of the month, he called me uncle without hesitation. No one questioned it. Partly because they were scared. Partly because they'd seen what he did to a malfunctioning maintenance drone. The thing went from sparking to particles in under 2 seconds. He hadn't meant harm. It had simply startled him. The higher-ups did notice. Word traveled. A kid with alien lineage, human tendencies, and dangerous potential wasn't something any galactic bureaucracy could ignore. A patrol ship docked on a Thursday. Slick hull, council markings, too many eyes and not enough smiles. The commander walked in like he owned the oxygen. Introduced himself as Gall Retek, Enforcer class. Carried orders stamped with 17 seals. He didn't shake hands. He didn't look at Seer. He just handed me a datapad and said, "The hybrid is to be transferred to Regulus Prime for containment and study." I didn't respond. Just handed the datapad back. "That wasn't a suggestion," he said. I said, "Good. I don't take suggestions." His men moved first. One reached for Seer. The child didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply looked at the man. Just one look. The soldier's arm froze midair. Veins darkened. He dropped to his knees, unconscious. No wounds. No noise. Just cold collapse. Retek reached for his blaster. I reached faster. He backed off. "We'll report this," he hissed. "You do that," I said. "Make sure to spell my name right." They left. I knew they'd be back. With more soldiers. With bigger guns. So I did what humans always do when someone threatens family: we get ready. I trained Seer quietly, carefully. Not as a soldier. Not as a killer. But as a human. Discipline, restraint, consequences. We built scenarios. Ran drills. Talked philosophy in a language he barely knew, because words matter. He learned fast. Too fast. I asked him, once, how he was able to manipulate matter with his mind. He just said, "I feel the cracks." I said, "Don't widen them. Just understand them." The mother returned. Watched us from the corner. Silent approval. Occasional warnings. Said she could smell a storm coming. I told her it already arrived. She didn't laugh. But she stayed. One night, Seer asked about meat again. Wanted to know why we cook it. Why we use fire. Why we alter the nature of something before eating it. "Because raw things bite back," I said. "And we learned early not to leave our throat exposed." He nodded. Said nothing else. Another night, I caught him standing on the edge of the docking bay, staring out into the dark. "Are you afraid of space?" I asked. "No," he said. "I'm afraid of the people who want to fill it with rules." That's when I realized he wasn't a child anymore. He was a symbol, a threat, a bridge, and everyone was watching to see which side he'd cross to. A council message pinged the outpost. Coded. Red tier urgency. Containment protocol initiated. Hybrid designation, Class Omega. Retrieval authorization, lethal force permitted. They weren't coming to talk. The mother wanted to run. I said no. Running meant we'd accepted their version of the story. Instead, I cleaned my rifle. Seer watched. Didn't ask to help. Didn't argue. Just placed a hand on the barrel and said, "You won't need this." Maybe not. But I needed him to see I was willing. Next day, a squad landed. Not council. Private. Off-books. Black-armored and fast. The kind sent when you don't want survivors. They didn't knock. They breached the hull wall and stormed the mess hall. They stopped moving 3 seconds later. Not because of gunfire. Not because of resistance. Because every molecule of oxygen in that room froze in place. He asked if humans cry. I told him only when it matters. He said vampires don't cry because they're taught not to feel. I told him that's not strength, that's a wound wearing armor. He didn't answer. Just stared out the viewport, watching a dead satellite drift like a memory no one wanted to claim. The ruins of Luraxis Prime came into view like a graveyard carved from fire. Blackened cities swallowed by glassed soil. Nothing left but echoes. We landed anyway. He needed to see it. Needed to understand where he came from, what was lost, and what remained buried. He didn't cry. He stood still, face unreadable, then bent down and picked up a shard of scorched metal. He asked if humans rebuild. I said always, even when we shouldn't. That night, his mother spoke for the first time without ice in her voice. She told me Seer's father was human. A soldier, unknown to Earth Command, who volunteered to stay behind during the siege. He held the last line while she escaped through the dark channels beneath the capital. His last words to her weren't about war or vengeance. They were about the child. If anything survives, he had said, find a human. We keep our promises. The council labeled Seer a Class Omega hybrid. Dangerous. Unstable. Politically inconvenient. They didn't see a boy. They saw a variable. Something too human to be a threat, and too alien to be trusted. I told them to find a different target. The next message didn't come as words. It came as assassins. They weren't loud. They didn't announce themselves. They slipped in through blind spots, cloaked and silent. But they weren't fast enough. Seer froze them in time before they crossed the threshold of his bunk. No theatrics. No scream. Just silence and stillness, as if time had sighed and decided to take a break. When they woke up, they didn't remember why they came. Just pain. Seer released them. Told me he could have erased them. I said, you didn't. That matters. He asked why humans don't use their strength to dominate. I told him that we tried. That we learned. That survival doesn't mean conquest. It means endurance. He wanted training. Not in weapons. In control. So I taught him the way I was taught, through consequences. I didn't reward restraint. I expected it. We ran drills. Conflict simulations. I used wooden sticks, he used willpower. We sparred until he could anticipate intention before motion. Until his instincts served choice, not impulse. He wanted to understand emotion. Why anger felt hot. Why guilt felt cold. Why humans screamed into pillows when they could just fix things. I didn't explain. I just told him to watch people. Real people. Engineers. Janitors. Cargo loaders. The ones who carried grief like it was their job. He learned more from their tired laughter than he ever could from me. Then he cried. Not from fear. Not from pain. From realization. He'd paralyzed a spider crawling across the mess wall just to see if he could do it without touch. He did. But when it died an hour later, he buried it in the hydroponics bay and whispered something in a language I didn't understand. Then he cried. He asked if that made him weak. I told him it made him human enough. The council escalated. Publicly they issued statements about safety and order. Privately they circulated internal memos calling for neutralization. They were afraid. Not of Seer. Of what he represented. A bond they didn't approve of. A child they didn't control. And Earth noticed. Earth's representatives walked out of the next council session. Quietly. Without speeches or fire. Just the word no etched in silence. The subtext was louder than any threat. A week later, the nearest human fleet repositioned near the border. No weapons powered. No demands made. Just visible enough to remind the galaxy who hadn't been invited to the funeral of Luraxus Prime. Seer's powers were evolving. He began hearing things before they were spoken. Feeling intent before decisions. He could track thoughts like ripples in water. I told him the galaxy was going to call him a weapon, that he didn't have to prove them wrong, just not make them right. His mother remained distant, but always present. She watched, observed, occasionally corrected his posture or warned him of old vampire rights he'd unknowingly violated. But she left discipline to me. Not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. He listens to you, she said. I don't want him to fear me. She told me once that their species never embraced uncertainty. That everything had purpose, order, tradition. I told her that humans build chaos into our systems just to remind ourselves we're alive. Then came the order. The council declared all hybrid children unstable asset. Detainable. Relocatable. Some called it protection. Others called it what it was, erasure. They wanted to quietly vanish every inconvenient birth across the quadrant. Earth didn't respond with protest. Earth responded with silence. And that silence was louder than war. Outposts along human-neutral zones stopped responding to council broadcasts. Earth-born captains began rerouting trade independently. Human medics started pulling resources from council-run facilities and replacing them with their own. No threats. No announcements. Just retreat and readiness. I told Seer we weren't going to run. That it's not about courage, it's about responsibility. He asked what that meant. I said responsibility is when you protect something that didn't ask to be protected. He said, like you do with me? I didn't answer. I just kept walking. Then he started dreaming. At first, it was whispers, then full visions. He described places he'd never seen. Battles not yet fought. Names he shouldn't know. His mother said it was ancestral memory, awakened by proximity to trauma. I said it was something else. Evolution, maybe. Or prophecy. Either way, it was waking up fast. One night, he asked what war was. I told him it was when diplomacy fails and pride picks up a weapon. He said, then why do we build weapons first? I told him because we're stupid. But also because we remember. That morning, a rogue warship under a false flag approached the station. Not Council. Not Earth. Mercenary. Funded off the books, probably with Council whispers behind it. They broadcast a false humanitarian request. We didn't respond. They fired a warning shot. It missed on purpose. Seer watched the light trail and said, they don't know who I am. I told him, let's keep it that way. But they boarded anyway. 10 soldiers, heavy suits, full armor. They weren't there for a fight. They were there to retrieve a child. Seer stood in the corridor, arms folded, calm as a winter storm. I didn't stop him. He raised his hand. The lights died. Gravity faltered. And time didn't stop. But it slowed. Like a breath being held too long. When it returned, the soldiers were unconscious, unharmed, and stripped of all weapons. Seer placed their gear in the docking bay in a perfect circle. His way of saying, you can leave now. His mother asked me later what the Council would do next. They won't act, I said. They'll stall. Hope Earth backs down. Will they? She asked. I said, Earth doesn't bluff. He was standing there again, quiet, still, with those huge, black pupil eyes staring at my stake like it held the secrets of the galaxy. And maybe to him it did. We'd been on Ceres Station for only a week, and this wasn't the first time I'd seen him linger near the cafe, eyeing meat like it was contraband. The station didn't serve his kind what humans would call food. Their kind were considered photosynthetic omnivores, but this kid? He wasn't buying that lie anymore. I'd seen it in his face. I'd also seen hunger before. Same expression I wore back on Earth before the draft. I slid the fork toward him. He didn't blink. Just stared at me, then at the utensil, then back. No words. No thanks. Just a shuffle forward, a snatch and a clean jab into my steak like he'd done it 100 times. I laughed. Couldn't help it. He didn't. Afterward, he vanished again. The next day, same thing. No words, just a slow hover around the table. Eventually, I ordered 2 steaks instead of 1. We didn't speak. He ate. Then left. Wordless ritual like clockwork. And after the 4th day, he called me uncle. Not sir, not human, not earthborn. Uncle. Like it was the most normal thing. I didn't question it, and that was the moment everything changed. The next visit came with a mother. She arrived like fog, silent, sudden, and stunning in a way that made the air thicken. She looked barely older than him, though the eyes said otherwise. She didn't sit. Didn't smile. She stared at me the same way he did the steak. Curious, cautious, a bit predatory. She thanked me for feeding her child. That was all. Then she left. 3 days later, she returned. This time she brought questions. About humans. Our meat. Our machines. Our wars. And about me. Why a human soldier from the Terran border force had retired to a backwater outpost like Ceres. Why I'd given a fork to a little vampire. I told her the truth. I had seen too much blood and not enough children smile. That her boy reminded me of someone I once failed to save. She didn't answer. Just nodded. Then asked if I'd meet someone. I didn't know she meant royalty. They don't use titles the way we do. There's no prince or counselor. But when she introduced me to the quiet Fong, I understood. He wasn't just a leader, he was their myth. A warrior, philosopher, and judge. He said I was trusted now. That the boy, his nephew, chose me. And that meant more than I understood. Suddenly, my quiet life on Ceres was gone. They invited me to their vessel. Organic, living architecture that pulsed like a heartbeat and hummed like wind through reed. I walked in as a human, walked out as something else. Still me, but now observed, recorded, remembered. I had unknowingly participated in a choosing, a cultural rite where an alien child selects a non-kin adult to form a sacred bond. Most times it's symbolic, but when it's cross-species, it echoes through political chambers and bloodlines. Now I was uncle to a boy whose bloodline shaped the fate of solar systems. With that came enemies. The human ambassador to the quadrant didn't like that I had a seat among them. He called it infiltration. He called me compromised. I called him irrelevant. The boy stood in front of me during the tribunal. Said one sentence that ended the argument. He fed me when you ignored me. That was enough. The room went silent. Even the humans. No rebuttal came. That's when I realized he wasn't just a child. He was a weapon honed by rejection and powered by loyalty. From then on, my life belonged to something larger. Their tech was unlike anything we knew. Silent, efficient, impossible to reverse engineer. And they gave me access, not because I earned it, but because I didn't ask. I listened. I learned. I trained. And when the trade convoys started disappearing near the Helix Gate, they asked me to go with them. Not to fight, but to advise. I brought instincts, pattern recognition, the human gift for chaos. The pirates weren't pirates. They were someone else's experiment. Biomechanical husks, shaped like nightmares, speaking in fractured binary and rage. The first engagement proved fatal to everyone, except our ship. The boy had activated a defense system none of them knew existed. He said the ship liked me. They believed him. On our return, his mother stayed behind. Claimed it was temporary. It wasn't. She moved into the sector housing beside mine. We never talked about it. She just appeared more often. At first, she visited during meals. Then late hours. Then without the boy. One night, she brought a small plant and said it was her people's version of furniture. I told her humans use couches. She blinked slowly and said, "This one sings." It did. I couldn't hear it, but she could. That same month, we were summoned again. This time to a neutral system, where both human and non-human factions gathered to discuss escalating tensions. The boy came, uninvited. He walked straight into the chamber and stood beside me. Nobody stopped him. Not even the guards. When the Terran delegate questioned my presence, the boy stood on the table, pointed a single clawed finger, and said, "He fed me. You wouldn't." And just like that, another silence fell. My name etched itself deeper into their record. I wasn't just uncle anymore. I was the bridge. But bridges get tested. A rogue faction attempted an assassination. Not on me, but on the boy. They knew he mattered. I stopped the blade. Not fast enough to prevent the wound, but enough to keep him breathing. I killed the attacker. Not by choice, but by instinct. I hadn't drawn a weapon in years. Turns out, some skills wait in the bones. The boy recovered. His people didn't see it as a near miss. They saw it as a declaration. War drums started echoing. Only this time they looked to me. Asked what humanity would do. I told them humanity would argue, posture, delay. But I wouldn't. I suggested a new option. Quiet infiltration, strategic disruption, and message delivery without open conflict. They agreed. And that's how I ended up leading a joint strike team of humans and vampires into the dark zones between the sectors. We didn't kill unless provoked. We didn't destroy unless necessary. We found the faction's core, recorded their plans, and exposed their funders, human and alien alike. Some screamed betrayal. Others whispered gratitude. When it was done, we returned. The boy met me at the docking port with 2 forks in hand. He said he'd cooked steak. It was terrible. I ate it all. Now he visits me every day. His mother, too. She brings plants, strange questions, and the occasional threat wrapped in poetry. We've formed something that defies definition. Not family, not alliance, something older. Something real. I once gave a hungry little vampire a fork. Now I have a place at their table, a voice in their chambers, and a target on my back. But for the first time since I left Earth, I feel useful.